The brain that was supposed to explain consciousness went completely silent. And that's when I finally heard everything. Consciousness, in my professional opinion, was a byproduct, an elegant trick of biology. The brain produced the mind the way an engine produces heat. Switch off the engine, and the heat disappears. There is no ghost. There is no signal surviving the machine. When the neurons stop firing, the show is over. That was not philosophy to me. That was observable, measurable, peer-reviewed fact. I was a neurosurgeon, 30 years with a scalpel in hand. I had held the organ that generates the self in my gloved hands, and I could tell you which region lights up when you fall in love, and which circuit breaks when the person you were yesterday ceases to exist. I said this on stages. I wrote it in journals. I told grieving families, as gently as a man who dissects certainty for a living knows how, that their loved one was not somewhere. That consciousness persisting without a functioning brain was neurologically impossible, a comforting fiction. And I believed every word with the same confidence I brought to the operating table each morning. But what happened when my own brain, every measurable function, every cortical layer, every neural pathway went dark for 7 days is the reason I can no longer say any of that. And it begins with a sound that has no source. Then the headache arrived. Not a headache, a detonation. I woke at 2 in the morning with a sensation I can only compare to a metal spike being driven through the base of my skull and twisted. My spine locked, my vision fractured into shards. I tried to call out, but my jaw clamped shut so violently I thought I had cracked a tooth. By the time the ambulance reached me, I was seizing on the floor, my body contracting in rhythms I would have recognized instantly in a patient. And the clinical term would have been catastrophic. Bacterial meningitis, aggressive, rare, the kind that attacks the neocortex, the precise layer of the brain responsible for everything that makes a human being human. Language, thought, spatial awareness, the capacity to know you exist. The infection consumed it within hours. By dawn, the neocortex was no longer functioning. Not impaired, not diminished, off. Entirely, verifiably off. The scans confirmed what my colleagues already knew. There was no higher brain activity, no cortical signal, no measurable trace of the architecture that produces conscious experience. A senior neurologist, someone I had trained alongside, someone who knew exactly what those scans meant, looked at the monitor and used a phrase that, in 30 years of practice, I had never heard applied to a colleague. He is no longer there. For 7 days, I lay in that bed. Machines breathed for me. Fluids entered me through tubes. My family was told, in carefully measured language, that the person they had known was medically gone, that the body might persist, but the mind that had operated in it had been erased. The discussion shifted from treatment to what happens when treatment is no longer the point. 7 days, no cortical activity, no neural signal, no engine running. And yet, inside that silent machine, something was not only running, it was flying. The moment my brain shut down, the world I knew dissolved. Not piece by piece, not gradually, the way anesthesia pulls you under in layers. It was instantaneous, as if someone had lifted me out of reality, the way you lift a hand out of water. One moment, searing, unbearable pain. The next, nothing. And I need to be precise about what I mean by nothing, because as a neuroscientist, I had spent decades defining it. This was not darkness. Darkness implies an observer registering the absence of light, and there was no observer. This was rest, the most total, unconditional rest I have ever encountered. No body, no identity, no location, no sense that time was something that existed or had ever existed. If you asked me to describe what death felt like from the inside, this was it. A suspension so complete that 1,000,000 years and a single second were the same non-event. There was no suffering in it, No fear, no cold, just an absence of everything, including the awareness that anything was absent. The deepest sleep imaginable, and I was not dreaming. But what tore through that stillness is something my 30 years of neuroscience cannot account for. And it didn't begin with an image. It began with a sound, a tone. Low at first. The low hearing, more felt than perceived. The way you feel the bass note of a cathedral organ vibrate through your ribs before your ears. Register it. It moved through me as if I were not solid, but porous, as if whatever I was made of had spaces between its parts, and the sound was threading itself through every gap. And the tone climbed. It rose in frequency and complexity until it was no longer a single note, but an entire architecture of sound, layered, recursive, alive. Harmonics folding into harmonics like light reflecting between two mirrors, generating a depth that seemed to have no bottom. And as the sound deepened, something began to materialize around me. Not visual at first, textural, a warmth, a density. The sensation that the space I occupied was filling with something that had weight and presence and intention. And then, carried on the crest of that sound, the light arrived. Not white, not gold, not any frequency on the spectrum I had studied. This was light that contained sound, that carried texture, that communicated meaning. Colors I had no names for bloomed around me in spiraling formations. Pigments that existed beyond the visible range, shades that my retinas could never have captured, but that I was perceiving with absolute crystalline clarity, as if whatever was receiving this information was not my eyes at all, but something deeper, something the neocortex had been blocking, not producing. I was being given something, not shown, delivered. A concentrated packet of knowledge compressed into a form that bypassed every sensory channel I understood and arrived whole, complete, undeniable. A window opened onto a scene so vast and so vivid that my 30 years of clinical expertise suddenly felt like a child's drawing held up next to the thing it was trying to depict. And in the center of that unfolding vision, carried on wings I had no right to recognize, but recognized instantly, I began to move. Wings. That is what I said, and that is what I mean. I was being carried, not by wind, not by any force I could name, but on something that moved the way a butterfly moves, unhurried, deliberate, tracing spirals through the air as if the destination mattered less than the path. I could feel them. Translucent, impossibly delicate, vibrating with a frequency that matched the tone still threading through everything. And the colors that rippled across their surface were the same colors flooding the world below me. Hues that have no earthly equivalent, shades that my scientific vocabulary simply cannot capture. And below me, the Earth. But not the Earth I had mapped in medical textbooks, not the planet I had seen from conference stages on projection slides. This was the original design, the draft before the damage. Soil so rich it seemed to pulse with its own heartbeat. Oceans that shimmered in gradients of turquoise and indigo so deep they looked like liquid sky. Mountains whose peaks were wrapped in a mist that glowed from within, as if the stone itself remembered what it was meant to be. And then I descended into a field, an open, borderless expanse of grass lit by a light that didn't come from above. It came from everywhere, from the ground, from the air, from the blades of grass themselves. And the first thing that reached me was the silence. Not the silence of an empty room, the silence of a world where nothing is broken, where no alarm needs to sound, where every system is running exactly as intended. And standing in that silence, I saw something that demolished every model of the brain I had ever built. And it started with the eyes of people who should not have been able to open them. The ground rippled, not with seismic force, with life, as if the earth itself was waking and waking everything within it. And from that ripple, across the entire span of what I could see, people began to rise. Not floating, not appearing from nowhere, rising, as if the soil had been a bed and the long rest was finally ending. And their faces, the faces are what I cannot let go of. Eyes opening with the startled clarity of someone who has slept deeply and wakes to discover the morning is more beautiful than any morning they have ever known. Bodies whole, restored, radiating a vitality I would estimate at the physical peak, strong, luminous, unburdened by any trace of the deterioration that had taken them from the world. An elderly woman I watched rise straightened her back, a back that I somehow knew had been bent by decades of pain, and stood tall, trembling not from weakness, but from the sheer disbelief of painlessness. She looked at her hands as if seeing them for the first time, and then she looked up, and across that field someone was running toward her. And the sound that escaped her when she recognized the face was not a word. It was the sound a heart makes when it discovers it was never truly broken, only waiting. And that sound, that specific, unrepeatable sound of reunion, multiplied across the field, in every direction, until the entire landscape was trembling with it. I saw mothers reach for infants, small bodies, perfect, complete, breathing, held aloft in arms that had ached for them across years that now collapsed into a single embrace. And I understood, without instruction, that those children would be raised, that every lullaby never sung would be sung, that every first step never witnessed would be witnessed, that the absence had been temporary and the presence would be permanent. And weaving through all of it, through the reunions, through the laughter that sounded like it was being invented for the first time, the animals, they emerged from everywhere, from the tree line, from the fields, from the riverbanks, not cautiously, not timidly, with the absolute confidence of creatures who have never known confinement or cruelty. Horses with coats the color of deep autumn surged across the meadows in formations that seemed choreographed by joy itself. Birds in plumage that shifted between colors I cannot name descended in spirals, landing on shoulders, on outstretched palms, on the heads of children who shrieked with a delight that was contagious even from where I hovered. Dogs bounded through the crowds, not toward anyone in particular, but toward everyone, pressing their noses against every available hand, circling legs, collapsing at the feet of anyone who sat down. Tails drumming the grass in steady rhythms of contentment. Cats stretched across sun-warmed rocks with that sovereign calm that only cats possess, unbothered and entirely at peace. And I watched a small girl sit cross-legged in the grass while a fawn, delicate, spotted, trembling with newness, folded its legs beside her and rested its head in her lap. And the girl laughed, and the fawn stayed. No predation. No hierarchy, no fear. Every species moving through the same space in a harmony so complete it felt like listening to an orchestra where every instrument has finally found its note. And through all of this, the tone, the sound that had first called me out of the silence, persisted underneath everything, woven into the light, into the colors, into the trembling of the ground as the sleepers rose. As if the entire scene was being sung into existence, as if creation itself had a frequency, and I was hearing it for the first time because the organ that had always been filtering it out, my neocortex, my analytical brain, my 30 years of clinical certainty, was finally quiet enough to let the signal through. And that is when I saw her. She was standing at the edge of the field near one of the rivers. Young, mid-20s perhaps, dark hair, eyes that held a warmth I could feel from a distance, the way you feel sunlight on your skin before you see the sun. She wore something simple and flowing, and she was looking directly at me. And I knew her. Not the way I knew the anatomy of the temporal lobe, not the way I knew a colleague or a patient or a face from a textbook. I knew her the way you know your own heartbeat. Not because someone taught you, but because the knowledge was already inside you, waiting to be acknowledged. She felt like family. She felt like a missing piece of something I hadn't realized was incomplete. She didn't speak. She didn't move toward me. She simply held my gaze with a steadiness that carried more information than any sentence could. And in that gaze, Something cracked open inside me, because standing in the presence of that scene, the reunions, the restoration, the living architecture of a future so immense that my entire career felt like a footnote, I was forced to confront what I had spent 30 years doing with absolute clarity. I had stood in front of lecture halls and explained consciousness the way a mechanic explains a carburetor. I had reduced the most profound mystery in human experience to a wiring diagram. And I had done it not because the evidence demanded it, but because the alternative terrified me. Because admitting that consciousness might not originate in the brain meant admitting that there was a dimension of reality my instruments could not measure, my papers could not publish, and my reputation could not survive. I had built a cathedral of certainty, and I had locked the door from the inside. And from somewhere, not from the woman, not from the sky, not from any direction I could identify, a knowing arrived. Not words. Something prior to words. Something that formed itself into meaning the way water forms itself into the shape of whatever holds it. You spent your life mapping the house. You never once asked who built it. That was all. No accusation, no catalog of failures. Just a single observation delivered with such quiet precision that it cut through every defense I had. And I understood. The search I had refused to begin, the genuine, humble, terrifying inquiry into whether there was a designer behind the design, was the only search that mattered. Not which institution I belonged to, not which tradition I endorsed, not whether I performed the correct rituals on the correct days. The question was simpler and harder than all of that. Had I ever, in 58 years, sincerely wanted to know the one who made the architecture I spent my life studying? The answer was no. I had studied the house with devotion. I had cataloged every room, every beam, every electrical circuit. And I had never, not once, knocked on the door and asked who lived there. The woman at the river's edge watched me absorb this, and in her gaze there was no judgment. Only the kind of patience that comes from knowing the answer before the question has been fully asked. The vision didn't fade. It was taken. One moment, the field, the sound, the light, the woman's steady gaze. The next, extraction. A violent compressive force, as if the entire expanded universe I had been moving through was being funneled through a needle point, and I was being pushed through it against my will. The colors collapsed. The tone shattered in the fragments. The warmth withdrew so fast it left a vacuum that felt like ice filling my chest. And then, weight. The unbearable, suffocating weight of a body I had forgotten I owned. Pain. Not sharp, not localized, but total. The pain of a physical system that has been offline for 7 days and is being forced to reboot. I could feel the tubes before I could see them. I could hear the machines before I could understand what they were measuring. And the fluorescent light above me, white, sterile, humming with a 60 hertz frequency that my recovering brain registered as an insult after the light I had just left, burned into my retinas like acid. I was back. I did not want to be back, but I understood, with the residue of that compressed knowing still warm inside me, that the window had closed for a reason. That what I had been shown was not a destination, but a preview. And a preview implies something yet to be completed. There was work left. Not the work of publications or surgical procedures. The work of becoming the kind of person who deserves to stand in that field without shame. The first face I saw when my eyes focused belonged to a nurse. She was staring at me with an expression I had seen on the faces of families 100 times. The look of someone watching something that, according to every protocol she has been trained in, should not be happening. I tried to speak. My throat was raw, my voice barely a whisper. But the words that came out were not about the pain, or the machines, or the 7 days I had been absent from the world. I said, "There was a woman, by a river. She knew me." The nurse called the doctor. The doctor called my family. And when my biological mother, a woman I had only recently discovered existed because I had been adopted at birth, arrived at the hospital 3 weeks later and placed a photograph on the table beside my bed. Everything I thought I knew about the brain, about consciousness, about the hard boundary between what is real and what is imagined, disintegrated. The woman in the photograph was the woman by the river. Same face, same dark hair, same eyes that held warmth like sunlight held before you see the sun. My biological sister, born 2 years before me. She had died at 24, 4 years before I was told I was adopted. I had never seen her face. I had never been told her name. I had no memory, no photograph, no fragment of information that could have provided my brain, my silent, offline, cortically inactive brain, with the raw material to construct that image. And yet, I had seen her, not as a blur, not as a symbol, with the resolution and specificity that I, as a neurosurgeon, know requires a functioning visual cortex to produce. A visual cortex that, for 7 days, had been confirmed by colleagues, by scans, by every instrument available, to be generating no signal whatsoever. I need to speak to you now, not as a neurosurgeon, not as a man with 30 years of credentials. As someone who lay in a bed with a brain that had stopped doing the one thing I spent my career insisting it was solely responsible for, and who received in that silence more than all those years of study ever gave me. If you are carrying someone tonight, if there is a name that tightens your throat when you say it, a face that appears behind your eyelids when the room goes dark, I want you to hear this from someone who once stood in front of grieving families and told them, with professional confidence, that their loved one simply no longer existed. I was wrong. For them, the pain ended the instant their eyes closed. In that same instant, everything that was hurting stopped. Not slowly, not through medication, not through the gradual dimming of awareness. It stopped completely. And what replaced it was rest. A rest so deep, so total, so free of suffering that whether it lasts a day or 10,000 years makes no difference. Because inside that rest, there is no clock, no loneliness, no memory of pain, just the most absolute peace a conscious being can experience. And the next thing they will know, the very next moment of awareness after that final breath, is that morning, the field, the rising, the sound that threads through everything, the arms reaching, the faces they loved, restored, radiant, running toward them across ground that glows with a light this world has forgotten how to make. You are not separated from them by years. You are separated by a pause they cannot feel and will never remember. For them, the distance between goodbye and reunion is the space between one heartbeat and the next. I cannot tell you which path will take you to the one who designed what I saw. I can tell you that the search is what matters. The honest, stumbling, daily act of reaching toward the one who built the architecture that contains everything. Not a label, not a membership. The raw, private, sometimes frightening willingness to ask, who made this and what does that maker want from me? That question, pursued sincerely, lived out imperfectly, is the preparation. It is the only credential that counts when the morning arrives. I am no longer the man who held brains in his hands and believed he was holding the whole story. The whole story is larger than any organ, any scan, any journal article, and it ends. If what I was shown is true, and I stake my entire scientific reputation on the claim that it is, with a reunion so complete that the word loss will lose its meaning entirely. The woman by the river, my sister, whose name I learned only after I saw her face in a place my brain could not have manufactured. She is resting now, in that deep, timeless, painless pause. And the next thing she will know is the morning when I find her again, by that same river, in that same light, and this time, I will know her name. Now tell me, in the comments, who is waiting for you on that morning? Whose face do you hold on to when the night feels longest? I will read every single one.